Hello everyone, my name is Brandon Griffin and today we're going to go over a very basic Excel introduction. So a couple things about Excel as we first get started. This is called Excel Lesson 1 and it's the basics. So let's go ahead and let's talk about Excel. So up here we have our toolbar, and on this ribbon we have a couple different features. We have the home, we have insert, page layout, formula, data, review, view, automate, and we have a couple different options. But starting out, where we are going to do most of our work today is actually going to be in this home tab. We have copy and paste functions. We can change font. We can change the alignment of our cells. We can change numbers. We can change styles, and we can do a bunch of different things. But first thing that I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to go down to the bottom right corner of my screen, and I'm going to increase the size of all of the data that I'm working with, just so you can see it a little bit easier and so I can see it a little bit easier. So you can hit these plus or minus buttons and you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller. But I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. So in Excel, each Excel file is called a workbook. Imagine like a file folder, a workbook, and each workbook can hold multiple worksheets or multiple pages. Excel is a great tool, and in each column we have lettered columns. So it goes A, B, C, D, all the way through the alphabet. And it can go pretty much infinite. So once we get past, the letter Z, it comes over here and it says A, B, A, C, and it just repeats itself. And then the rows go from 1 to, like a million, as much as we want. After about a million rows, Excel starts to break down a little bit and isn't as good. But here, let's look at our data. So in A1, it says pay period, B2 says employee, C2 says hours, D2 says wages, E2 says total compensation. And then we have information about each one of our employees here. But what we want to do, we actually want to widen these columns so we can see these headers cleanly. So between A and B, you can actually widen the column. So naturally, Excel has this little white cursor right here. It looks like a little plus sign. And if you select the column, if you click on this A, it'll highlight the entire column. And between A and B, there's a line. Between each column, there's this little gray line. So if I select A, I don't even have to have it selected, but if I put my cursor between A and B, it changes from this black arrow pointing down when you're over one of these rows or one of these columns. It'll turn to this black arrow, and it'll turn into an arrow pointing left and right with a black line going down the center. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to hold down with my, I'm going to left click on my mouse, I'm going to hold it down, and I'm going to widen the column. And I can do that to A, I can do that to column B, I'm going to widen it just a little bit, I'm going to do it to C, I can do it to D, and I'm going to do it to E. E is super wide. Another thing that you can do to make it a shortcut is if you actually select up here, select the entire column, columns A through E, and you double click, it'll automatically resize the width of the column for you. And it'll automatically resize it to the width of the largest or the widest column. So if you had something that was super long, so if you had super long text right here, and then you double click, it would automatically resize to the width of the longest text that you have. So here we now can see all of our headers very clearly, but one thing I want to do is I want to change it just a little bit so I could make them stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to adjust this to be bolded. So I'm going to select A1 through E1. I'm going to select all those cells, or I could do it individually, but I'm going to select all of them and I'm going to bold. So now my headers are bolded. And one other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make them go to the middle and I'm going to make it go to the center. So I'm going to change the alignment. I could align them so they're at the left, to the right, to the middle, and the top, bottom, or center. But I'm going to align them so they are at the middle and the center. So here I have pay period, employee, hours, and wages. And I'm going to center these as well. I just like to have everything centered, look neat, look nice. So in Excel, people often call it the world's most powerful calculator, and there's a reason for that. It can do basic functions such as adding, subtracting, multiply, divide, but it can also do more advanced features that we'll get into in later videos. But here we can see that we are going to calculate total compensation. So we're going to multiply hours and we're going to multiply wages. But first I want to format wage to be a number. So wage is the dollar per hour that the employee is earning. So in D2 through D5, I'm going to select all these cells. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select accounting number format. Or if I hit this down arrow, I could go to more number format. So I could do it as a currency, but I'm just going to hit this $sign right here. So now I know for pay period 2, John worked 22 hours and earned $12.66 per hour. So total compensation, I need to write a formula that calculates 22 multiplied by 1266. And there are a couple different ways I can do this. So I'm going to click in E2 where I want this answer, where I want my formula, and I'm going to do equals. And either I can do D2, I can click on it, and I need to multiply with the asterisk, and I can multiply by C2. Or if I wanted to, I could manually come up here and I could do equals D2 multiplied by C2. But personally, I find it easiest to click in the cell that you want your data, that you want your formula. So I can do E2, I'm going to multiply, then I just click on D2 and I click on C2. And we can see that D2 is highlighted in blue and it's multiplied by C2, which is highlighted in red, which gives us $278.52. One really cool thing about Excel that we can do is we can actually copy and paste this formula that we've calculated down to our other cells. So I just calculated D2 multiplied by C2, so hours by wage, which gave us $278.52. But I need to do this for each employee. So naturally, I would go E2 times C2 and D2, and I do this for each and every cell. But if we get tens, hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of pieces of data, of rows of data, that would become very cumbersome. That'd be very slow, and honestly, you'd probably make errors. So one thing that Excel does is it allows you to copy and paste down your formula. There are limitations to it, and there are some best practices, such as absolute cell references, but those are a little bit more advanced and for a different day. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to copy and paste this formula of D2 multiplied by C2 down. So in E2, what I can do is I can either right click and I can copy and I can select the cells that I want it to, and I can right click and I can paste, or I could do that with the keyboard. I can do Control C and I could scroll down and I could hit Enter, or I can hit Command V or Control V if you're on a PC. Or the easiest way, honestly, is to probably highlight E2, and in the bottom right corner, we see that naturally it is this green square that surrounds all of these, or each cell that we're on has this green square. I can't talk. And in the bottom right corner, it is a green square. And your cursor turns from this black or this white plus sign to this black plus sign. And if you double click, it'll copy and paste all of your formulas down. So now we can see that total compensation for John's $278.52, Sally is $738.27, Laura made $99.89, and Drew made $561.66. So now we need to calculate what the sum of all of this is. So we could do another formula in E6. We could do equals, and we can do plus E5 plus E4 plus E3 plus E2. But that gets very difficult to do. So we're going to use our first function in one of our formulas. So to do a formula, we start with the cell that we want. So we want E6. I'm going to do equals. And then I'm going to do the sum, S-U-M, the sum. And it gives us a little hint. It says adds all the numbers in a range of cells. So in E6, I do the sum of, and I'm going to select E2 through E5. If I wanted to, I could do E2, comma, E3, comma, E4, comma, E5, going all the way down. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do the sum. So I can do equals the sum of, open parentheses, E5 through E2. And then I hit enter, and I see that the sum of all the compensation for pay period 2 is $1,678.34. One other thing that I want to do is I want to format this a little bit. So naturally, we see that this is separate from the rest of our data. You know, this is aggregate. This is something that we're adding up. So I want to put a line between my kind of two sections of data. So in cells A5 through E5, I'm actually going to go up here to font. It's on the home tab under this font section, and I can click on this down arrow, and it gives me a bunch of different types of borders. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click this bottom border. So I can see that it has now separated the total compensation between, you know, the total compensation by employee. All right, let's calculate a couple other different things. Let's go to C6, and I'm going to do equals, and I want to find the average number of hours that employees worked. So I'm going to go to C2, and I'm going to drag down from C2 through C5. So I'm going to keep holding left click on your mouse. So the average amount of hours that each employee worked was 25. And similarly to like what we did with compensation, if I click on this formula bar, I can see that everything's highlighted in blue. And if I copy this over one to the right, everything in blue will move over to the right. So I'm going to do Control C and Control V, and I see that the average wage per employee is $15.27. I can do that again. So I can go to this box in the bottom right corner, I can drag it to the right, or I can right click, I can copy, and then I can right click and hit paste, or I can right click, hit copy, go to the cell I want, hit enter. And let's format this as a dollar. So here I can see I have 4 employees during pay period 2. The average hours worked was 25.25 hours. The average wage was $15.72. And the total compensation was $1,678.34. If I wanted to, I could calculate this as an average. So if I wanted to have different maybe rows of data, I can maybe do average, and then this one could be a sum. So I could come up here and I could change this one to be average, and it'd be the average of E5 through E2, and then this would be maybe the sum of all hours worked. But again, the sum of wage maybe doesn't necessarily make sense, because that doesn't necessarily mean anything. That's just, everyone's wage added up. So that doesn't necessarily make sense. Average wage probably would make sense, but the sum of hours is valuable, and then the sum of compensation is also valuable. One thing about Excel, and in data analytics in particular, is you kind of have to know the data you're working with. Just doing an average, doing a sum, doing, different types of formulas on your numbers is valuable, but you have to know what you're talking about. So the sum of wages isn't necessarily that vital, that important to know. Because if we multiply these two together, it doesn't really give us anything. It gives us $6,300, which, it doesn't really mean anything. So coming back here, we have the average and we have the sum of all of this different data. So we are done with putting and working with the data on this first sheet. And let's go ahead and work with this. So this is our compensation during pay period 2. So I'm going to go ahead and name this, let's do period space 2. So what I did is I double clicked where it said sheet 1, or you can right click and you can actually rename. So I renamed this to be period 2. So now I'm going to go to where it says sheet 2. So remember, I'm in one workbook and I'm on one worksheet. So I'm going to move to a different worksheet. So on sheet 2, I can see that we have data up here. It's a little bit small, so I'm going to make it bigger. And we see that we have pay period, total hours, and total wages, and then it asks us some questions. So on A, I'm going to increase the width of the column, and B, I'm going to increase the width of the column, and C, I'm going to increase the width of the column. We can't really do the hack. I don't know if hack's the right word. We can't really do the trick, the double click between A and B, because these ones are so big, it'll make the rest of our cells become kind of out of whack. So I'm going to undo. So if I come up here to this back arrow, I'm going to undo column width, or I can do Control Z. So let's look at the data here. So let's bold these and center these. That's just kind of good. It's kind of good manners, hygiene. Whatever. So we see it says pay period 1, total hours, total wages. I'm going to center these cells. So total hours is 116 hours during pay period 1, and total wages was $1,949.28. I'm going to change this to be $1. So I come up here to this number, change it to be $1. And we need to bring over what the total hours were and the total wages were for pay period 2. And there are a couple different ways to do this. So we're on sheet 2, and I'm going to go ahead and rename this. Let's go ahead and name this maybe wages. So we keep track of what all the wages were and what all the employees' hours they worked were. And we can actually come over here to period 2. And if we wanted, the total hours worked, that's the sum or the total. So that's 101. So I can come back here to wages and I can type in 101 and total wages. So I just typed in total hours. Total wages, is 1,678. So I can type in 1,678.34. But naturally, that's going to be prone to errors if you enter that in manually. So one thing that you can do in Excel, you can actually use formulas on one worksheet and reference data on another worksheet. So in B3, I'm going to do equals. And if I were to select a cell on the same workbook, it just says equals, E2 or equals G6. But if I go back, B3, and I do equals, and I select period 2, it says equals, and in single quotes, it says period 2, exclamation point. So it's saying on the period 2 worksheet, what am I selecting? So in period 2, I want to select the total hours. So that is C7. So equals, single quotes, period 2, single quote, exclamation point, C7. So I'm bringing back C7 on the period 2 worksheet, which means my total hours is 101. And I can do the same thing for wages. I can do equals, and I can go to period 2, and I could type in total compensation, or reference total compensation. It's easiest to click what you want, but in all reality, I could type it in if I wanted to. So I can do equals, single quote. I can do period. There's a space 2, single quote, exclamation point. I think it was E7 off the top of my head. Yep. So now I see that I have my total hours and total wages from that period 2 worksheet. All right, so now it's going to ask us which pay period had higher total wages. So we see that, pay period 1 had higher total wages than pay period 2. And there are a couple different ways that we could do this. One, we can just look and we can subtract. Or if we wanted to in D2, we could do equals, and we could do is C2, and we can do the greater than sign. So C2 greater than C3, and if it's true, it means we have a higher total wage. But there are a lot of things we can do to check different numbers. But for now, let's just eyeball it, and we can see that pay period 1 had higher total wages. So I'm going to type in period 1. And then which pay period had higher total hours worked? That was pay period 2, or pay period 1. So which had higher total hours worked? That's pay period 1. So I'm going to answer period 1. All right, so we have finished putting all of our data in, but now I want to create some sort of visualization. If someone were to look at this, there are only 2, pay periods, so it isn't that hard to decipher what's going on. But at the end of the year, there are going to be, 26 pay periods if they get paid every 2 weeks, or there's going to be 52 if they get paid weekly, 12 if they get paid monthly, so the data really stacks up. So I want to create some sort of chart or graph or some sort of visualization. So the easiest way to do this is to select the data you want to show in the graph first, and then go over and insert a recommended chart or graph. So here on the top of this ribbon, we see that we have a bunch of different tabs. So we've been working on the home tab, but now I'm going to go over to insert, and we can insert a recommended chart, but I need to select the data I want first. So I want A3 through C3. So if I left click on A3 and then hit Control or Command if you're on a Mac, C3, it selects both of those ranges of data. So I have A1 through A3 and C1 through C3, and then I insert and I go to recommended charts. It gives me a couple different recommended charts that I could do. And let's see. So this first one wants to put pay period and total wages, kind of in their own separate thing, which I don't necessarily want. I could come over here and I could put pay period and total wages on their own thing. And it looks like Excel doesn't like the way that I put in my data. So let's try something else a little bit. So let's just select C1 through C3 and let's do recommended charts. And look, this is already looking a lot better than I wanted. So if I click on this clustered column chart, it automatically shows and brings back the different pay periods. So pay period 1 had total compensation close to 1950. Pay period 2 had total compensation close to 1678. And now I can actually come, and if I click on this graph, on this chart, I can do this plus sign, and I can add chart elements. I could add data labels. I could add a legend, I could add a trend line, I can add a bunch of different pieces of information. But here I have just a very basic visual in Excel. And one other thing we need to do, we are done working with this, so we need to save. One thing I should have said earlier, you need to save frequently and you need to save often, because you never know if your computer's going to crash, you never know if the power's going to go out, you don't know a lot of different things. So the easiest way to save is simply, you can turn on autosave if you have... I'm not sure if everyone has it or if that's only on people with 365 subscription, but you can turn on autosave, or you can hit this floppy disk right here. So you can do Control S or hit this floppy disk and you'll save. Save. If you save it once, it's saved. If you hit it 100 times, it's extra saved. So save, and we can see that we have all of our data that we filled out in period 2, and we have all of our data from wages. So this has been a very basic overview and introduction to Excel. We're going to dig into some more advanced things as the videos go along, as the semester goes along. So everyone, good luck with future assignments. Good luck with this week's assignment. It's going to be very basic, very easy if you follow along with this video. If not, let me know if you have any questions. Have a great day and happy learning.